and I'll be introducing speakers today. And so Joseph Misumara is a senior in the College of Arts and Sciences and is the Vice President of Students for an Environmentally Active Campus and is a co-founder of Fossil Free Marquette, a campaign dedicated to promoting environmentally responsible investing. And then Kelsey Malakara will be talking first about her work as Marquette's Sustainability and Energy Management Coordinator. So I'm going to pass things over to Kelsey now.
Hi, 1 second. Let me just share my presentation with everybody, and then we'll get started. So I'm Chelsea Malakara. Hold on, let me just make sure. Can you see that, Amanda?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Chelsea Malakara, Marquette's Sustainability and Energy Management Coordinator, and I want to thank Amanda for hosting me and then Joseph for asking me to be his 5 to 8 minute opener today. So I'm going to very briefly kind of give an overview about where things stand with sustainability at Marquette. So the way I like to start every talk I give is to just define what, when I'm talking about sustainability, what that means. So sustainability, the definition of sustainable development was first created in 1987 by the World Commission on Environment and Development, and they, in their report, One Common Future, they define sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So a pretty common definition, but it's one thing that has really evolved from that is that sustainability is not a fixed state, but rather a process of change that really seeks to harmonize environmental protection, social equity, and economic viability. And the way to really visualize that is in this Venn diagram type of depiction. So we can look at, what does it mean to be a part of society? What does it mean when we talk about economics? And what do we mean when we talk about the environment? And what are those things? How do those things intersect? And what kind of comes out of that? When you look at the middle, but what a real sustainable community looks like. It looks like environmental justice and worker benefits and fair trade, and it looks like an economy that is run off in energy efficient fuel sources and subsidies and incentives and green technology. So when I am working in with sustainability at Marquette, my lens is through all these three lenses put together. It's not just focused on the environmental protection piece, it's focused on all of these things. And to sort of give you some context of what I mean by that, Marquette is a part of the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Ed, otherwise known as ASHE. And with that comes a lot of benefits from shared resources with other universities to workshops, events, conferences, all of those kind of things. But most importantly, they are the administrator of what's called a STARS report, and that stands for Sustainability Tracking, Assessment, and Rating System. And it looks at these 5 categories of sustainability impact areas, from academics to operations to engagement to planning, administration, and then innovation, and all these subcategories from curriculum to well-being and work. And so when I'm looking at and evaluating areas in which I could make an impact, or we as a university can make an impact, I'm looking at all the different areas and departments and offices at the university. And when you submit this report, you get rated, and then you are deemed you're in the bronze category, silver, gold, or platinum. Platinum being the highest category. And in 2016, Marquette achieved a silver rating. And right now I'm working on submitting our report. It's usually submitted every 2 to 3 years. And the last one was submitted in 2016. So I'm working on Marquette's report for this year. So a quick snapshot of Marquette's sustainability journey, if you didn't already know. In about 2011, 2012, the first formal sustainability coordinator was hired. In 2015, President Lovell signed the Laudato Si St. Francis Pledge, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then in 2016, that first STARS report was submitted. And then in 2018, our first campus sustainability plan was published, which I'll also talk about. And then we kind of had a little lapse in a sustainability coordinator position, but then in 2020, I was hired. And I'll kind of talk about where we're going, where we're headed towards the end of the presentation. So the Laudato Si St. Francis Pledge was a really important commitment that the university signed onto. And really it is a commitment to, one, pray and reflect on the duty to care for God's creation and protect the poor and vulnerable, to learn about and educate others on the causes and moral dimensions of climate change, assess how we as an institution contribute to climate change. That's where that STARS report comes in. And then act to change our choices and behaviors, and then advocate for Catholic principles and priorities in climate change discussions. So when I first started, one of the things I did was sort of look at Marquette's values and how they overlap with my goals in sustainability. So I looked at that value of excellence, and how we're going to do that is provide our students with high quality and experiential education that prepares our students, no matter their chosen path, to live and thrive in a world that will be faced with climate change challenges. Then looked at faith and how sustainable development is holistic, and it encompasses those three dimensions, and sort of the nexus of these elements can be rendered intelligible in the context of various biblical ideas of interdependence and the relationship between the body and its parts and our environment. And then leadership, thinking about how Marquette will strive to serve as a leader Catholic university and fulfill our signed commitment to to the St. Francis Pledge. And then service, which is inherently part of our institution, and how building a sustainable community is not just about serving the individual, but it's really about serving our local and global community, our future generations, and the planet to really create a more just, equitable, and healthier place to live. So in our campus sustainability plan, which was published in 2018, we outlined 4 fundamental priorities: literacy and capacity, funding, sustainable development, campus and community engagement. And I won't dive too deep into the campus sustainability plan just for time's sake, but you can go and look at that on our website, marquette.edu/sustainability, and there's a PDF link to it there. But just a quick snapshot of some of the areas that we're working in. One is energy, the biggest one, and we have set a goal to reduce our emissions by 25% by 2025. We've set a goal to reduce our waste production by 10%, divert materials from the landfill increase that to 25%, and then decrease our water use by 10%, all by 2025, and I'm working on a strategic plan to get us there. I won't go over all of these pieces, but again, we are making progress, and the university is doing a lot in regard to energy use and consumption and emissions reduction. And there's also a lot of opportunity as well. Transportation, I'm sure most folks on this know what great resources we have to choose alternative transportation that does not rely so much on fossil fuels, from our unlimited ride pass with our student ID and MCTS, the bubbler bike station, some car parking and carpooling benefits, and bicycle parking. And again, a lot of different opportunities to improve our transportation options as well. And then sustainable food, we go with, student dining is always controversial because students eat the same stuff throughout the semester, but Sodexo is nationally known for their green and sustainable initiatives, and here at the university, that's no different. We do waste oil recycling. There is a focus on supporting local restaurants and local and sustainable food procurement. We have those Aussie machines, the reusable to-go containers, and offer vegan and vegetarian algae-free options. There's a lot more that Sodexo does too. And then we also have a focus on food security for students, which includes our backpack program and then the food recovery network. And there's others as well. Again, always more opportunities for improvement and progress. And then sort of this be the difference. How can you do that here at the university? These aren't the only 2 student organizations in which you can do that, but these are just the 2 main ones I've listed. There's SEEK, Students for an Environmentally Active Campus, Fossil Free Marquette. There's the Native American Student Association. There's the Ocean Conservation Club. Myself and another colleague just started the first sustainability related employee resource group called Sustainable Marquette. And this summer and then throughout the next school year, we'll be offering a student internship program with Marquette Sustainability. And again, just numerous opportunities to really change and shift the culture here at Marquette. So looking ahead, this year I completed the last couple years greenhouse gas inventory to understand where we are with emissions and where we stand with our goals, and we'll be submitting our second STARS report this fall. This fall we'll be starting to develop the second version of a campus sustainability strategic plan, and by 2025 our hope is to achieve those reduction goals we've already set and then to set new reduction targets. So I will leave ideas, concerns, questions to the end after Joseph gives his presentation, but I will end my screen sharing and pass it over to him.
All right, thank you so much, Chelsea. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, Amanda, you can see this, right?
Yep.
Cool, sounds good. Yeah, hi, my name is Joseph Miscamara, and yeah, so I'll be talking about climate action at Marquette. Again, this is like an event that is co-hosted between Simply Substance and SEEK, Students for an Environmentally Active Campus. So I just want to thank everybody for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity. But yeah, so the subheading is why our Jesuit values and environmental justice advocacy go hand in hand. So you might be asking, what's the point of this talk? I have 3 main points that I kind of want to convey by the end of this hour. So first, to explain why the Marquette community should embrace climate action. Second, to shed light on current environmental initiatives on campus. And then also to assign everyone some action items, because I know that everybody loves having stuff that they can actually do in order to make the world a better place. And when we're talking about these action items, we're going to focus on the theme of thinking globally and acting locally. So about me, I'll just talk really quickly about like my background and like what values I have and how I got to be here. But I'm originally from Hinsdale, Illinois. I was born in Chicago and then I was raised in the suburbs. And I've always been into environmentalism. And here's a picture of me. I loved frogs back in the day. In 5th grade, I had a class project where some classmates and I like worked to save our prairie, and that's me right here. But yeah, so I came to Marquette, and I'm currently a senior right now. I study environmental studies and data science, and I've also been involved in Midnight Run, MAP, Marquette Action Program, Mardi Gras, and Ultimate Frisbee. So as I was like taking my first few classes at Marquette, I was initially undecided about what my majors were, but I slowly started to figure out that I wanted to do something related to climate change and environmentalism. So I actually got in the internship after my sophomore year here at the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes at UC San Diego. It's part of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. But my position was I was a climatology research intern. I essentially investigated the climate change effects on atmospheric rivers, which are like huge storms that can hit the west coast of California and provide like a ton of water. In fact, they can carry the same amount of water vapor flow as 15 times that of the Mississippi River, which is insane. So here's me presenting my research at the American Meteorological Society conference. And yeah, it was 2 consecutive summers. The first one was in person, and I had like views like this outside my office. It was amazing. And then last summer it was remote. But yeah, this was like a really good like opportunity for me to learn about like climate science and how climate change is actually working from a physical standpoint. But I also wanted to know like how does this impact like human communities? And I got the opportunity to study abroad, and I chose to go to South Africa and Cape Town, which I partly decided to do because in 2018 they had this huge drought, and they have a very similar climate to like San Diego, California. So I wanted to know like this is a population that has already dealt with so much, you know, with apartheid and racial injustice. Like how is the Cape Town community like responding to climate change, and how are they using their resilience to overcome like these environmental challenges? So I worked at an environmental justice nonprofit, but unfortunately I got sent home 3 months early due to COVID. 2020 sucked, but I came back to Marquette, and right now I'm the vice president of SEEK, Students for an Environmentally Active Campus. You can see Aaron, he has his camera on, he's the president. Thanks for joining us, Aaron. And I've also been really involved with Fossil Free Marquette, which you can see up here in the top right. This is, can you guys see my mouse, by the way? Aaron, can you like nod? Okay, you can, cool. Yeah, this is our protest on the Global Day of Climate Action. Here's me speaking at it. And I'm going to talk about Fossil Free Marquette and SEEK as well. But quick side note, next year I'm going to Billings, Montana. I'm going to be doing Jesuit Volunteer Corps Northwest, and I'll be doing outreach for a local science museum. So that's the next chapter of my life. But I hope this gives you an understanding of who I am, why I'm here right now. But before we go into the main talk, I just want to throw this number up there. And if you know what this means, I'll give you 5 seconds to answer and explain what this number is. Cool. Okay, well, this number corresponds to the, oh, somebody said, sorry, somebody's in the chat right now. 419 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as of 2 days ago. Okay, this graph was made 2 days ago by the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which I mentioned I worked for the last 2 summers. And just so you guys know, this carbon dioxide concentration is a 50% increase from pre-industrial levels, okay? So this is like an update. I just want you guys to know, like, take a deep breath right now. Congratulations, you are breathing in an atmosphere that has more carbon dioxide than any, human in history. And I can say this with like certainty because the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association or Administration just last week said that carbon dioxide levels are now higher than at any time in the last 3.6 million years. Okay, and if you were wondering what humans were up to back then, this is what they looked like. So just as a reminder too, this horizontal line indicates where we need to get to prevent catastrophic warming, as according to the International or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So we got work to do. We gotta keep going down. Actually, no, we got to start going down and then keep going down. But with that being said, I just want to lay out some 5 basic climate truths, and this is a prerequisite for like following this discussion right now. Climate change in 10 words can be summed up as 1, it's warming, 2, it's us, 3, scientists agree, 4, it's bad, and 5, it's fixable. And I wanted to lay this out to first just put us on like the same page and make sure that everybody understands this. But second of all, if you disagree with any of these points, A, stop getting your scientific information from Fox News, and B, please don't ask me any questions about any of these like 5 truths, because I'm not going to do your homework for you. We are well past like the debate of like climate change, and we're going to talk about climate action. Okay, so but if you agree with all these, then we can move on. So I also just want to talk really quick about 5, it's fixable, because there is hope. And if you don't believe that, then you're what we call a doomer in the environmentalism circle. And the way that there is hope is through rapid decarbonization and electrification. So in this talk, I'm talking about climate action. This is what I'm specifically referring to, okay? Replacing fossil fuels with renewables and reducing energy consumption. And this is the one thing we need to do to prevent climate change, mostly. So it requires both systemic and individual action. Carpooling isn't going to change the world, but it's a good start and we need it. So it won't fix everything, but it's the most important step we need to a more sustainable world. And so what that looks like is, if you look at this graph on the right, we need to phase out all coal right now. As soon as we're done doing that, we need to phase out natural gas. And we need to do that by replacing it with solar, winds, hydropower, and keeping nuclear energy. So this is just like one sustainable development scenario. But the whole point of this talk is that, Dr. Michael Mann is one of the most famous climate scientists of all time. He said that there is no way to avert the climate crisis without keeping most of our coal, oil, and gas in the ground, plain and simple. So that's the simple truth. We just need to shift to renewable energy. And what we're talking about today is how Marquette can be part of that just transition. So part 1, why Marquette should embrace climate action. This is kind of messed up. Jesuit Catholic values. Okay, so AMDG, this is what I'd like to think of as half of the theological basis for why Catholics should embrace climate action. And essentially it just relates to the values of goodness of creation and sacramentality, or seeing God in all things. And this is like a cornerstone of Catholic tradition. And it was first linked to ecological conservation by historical Catholic figures like St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. But in more recent years, contemporary leaders like Pope Francis, he wrote Laudato Si in 2015, which is all about environmentalism and climate action. And I really encourage everyone who's watching right now to read this because it is fantastic. But also the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, are all about climate action too. They, in 2019, indicated 4 universal apostolic preferences. It essentially means that they set 4 guidelines for all Jesuits to follow for the next 10 years. And one of them was care for our common home. So yeah, the Jesuits, Pope Francis, they're all about this. And this whole idea of AMDG is just understanding that God created this universe and we need to honor his creation by protecting it. The other half of this idea of the Catholic and Jesuit values is cura personalis, or men and women born with others. So understanding that in addition to respecting God's creation, we need to respect other people as well, and make sure that they're being protected by having a safe environment. So I think Pope Francis really sums this up nicely with his 2 quotes in Laudato Si. The first is, today we have to realize that a true ecological approach has always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And another one, intergenerational solidarity is not optional, but rather a basic question of justice, since the world we have received also belongs to those who will follow us. And I think, the first one relates to vulnerable communities today, and the second one relates to generations that aren't alive right now. So let's talk about this first one right now, because there are really important things for us to understand with environmental justice. And the Catholic Church is all about this, but as defined by the EPA, environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So essentially, environmental justice will be achieved when everyone has the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards, and also equal access to this decision-making process to have a healthy environment. So just as an example of environmental injustice, I want to lay out some things that are important. So this is just a fact, and there's no way to go around it. Climate change disproportionately impacts Black, Indigenous people of color. So one example is shown in this picture right here, redlining. Okay, this is in Richmond, Virginia, and there's examples like this all over the country, including in Milwaukee, where if you don't know what redlining is, essentially it's segregation, historical segregation based on race. And the neighborhoods that Black people were restricted to living to nowadays have more of a severe heat island effect due to less tree cover, more pavement, and rising temperatures. So climate change is a comorbidity. It is a threat multiplier to a lot of historical racism. And we can also see this in food insecurity for Native American tribes who rely on subsistence hunting and farming. And also Hurricane Katrina. I could talk about this all day, but Hurricane Katrina really brought out a ton of environmental injustices in so many different ways, which I wish I could get into right now, but we don't have the time to talk about this. But I just want to outline the fact that environmental justice is rooted in the Catholic tradition, and it has been for centuries. But let's talk about Marquette's environmental commitments. So in addition to just being a Catholic and Jesuit school, we signed the Laudato Si pledge in 2015. This is president level signing it. And essentially a pledge to advocate for Catholic principles and priorities in climate change discussions, especially as they impact those who are poor and vulnerable, and also just reducing our contributions to climate change and ecological degradation. So this was in 2015. And just as a reminder, our mission statement ends with the phrase, or the sentence, "All this we pursue for the greater glory of God and the common benefit of the human community." Okay, so written in our mission statement and our guiding values is upholding these values of environmental justice and care for creation. But let's do a quick checkup on where Marquette's at. So this is Marquette's financial report in 2020. On page 6, I think they have a page that's just dedicated to how like we are living out our Jesuit values, and they have one which you can see that's care for our common home, care of our common home. So let's zoom in on that. The university began using a new type of brine to melt snow and ice. This method is more economical and environmentally sustainable and safer for campus. I don't know about you guys, but this seems like barely a start. You know, I think that the university can do a lot better, and I'm so glad that Chelsea's, you know, here now as our sustainability coordinator, and I love everything that she talked about. But moving forward, we got to do better than, you know, just using a new type of brine to melt snow and ice. So that's why you guys are all here, and I'm grateful for that. So part 2, current environmental initiatives on campus. So yeah, now we're just going to talk about what is going on campus regarding sustainability and climate action. First, seek students for an environmentally active campus. It's dedicated to campus activities, and we also host discussions, events focused on sustainability. So like here's an event that was actually on Sunday. We went to Bradford Beach to the campus cleanup, and we picked up like 15 bags of garbage. It was super, super cool. And there's me. So yeah, the info for joining Seek will be at the end of the presentation, so stay tuned. But this is more like a local club organization. We're dedicated to like local environmental initiatives and stuff. But there's also one that's more global, and this is fossil fuel divestment. And if you don't know what that is, here's essentially fossil fuel divestment in haiku form. Okay, Marquette invests in fossil fuel companies. That is really bad. Marquette should divest, and y'all can help out with that. Oops. Let's be the difference. Okay, so that just kind of sums up what divestment is and what we are seeking to achieve. Fossil fuel companies. So if you don't know what divestment means, Marquette's investment policy still permits investments in fossil fuel companies, and that's either through direct ownership or indirect ownership through mutual funds, hedge funds, and other third-party managers. There's also no transparency. We really don't know what fossil fuel companies Marquette is invested in, and that's a problem. But divestment / divestiture, they're the same thing. This is a noun. I just want to like put the definition of the word on here. It's the opposite of an investment. It simply means getting rid of stocks, bonds, or investment funds that are unethical or morally ambiguous. And it's like a multifaceted approach to promoting climate action. The first is just like physically driving down like the share prices of companies, which makes sense. But it also revokes the social license to operate. And what I mean by that is that the more that these companies are kind of cast in like a bad light for like not being great actors on like climate change, the more that their social license to operate is revoked. And here's an example of that. So like this year, this Clean Creatives campaign was launched, and a bunch of like PR firms are now refusing to have fossil fuels like companies as clients, which is awesome. So like we're seeing that these companies, like they're losing their social license to operate in our world. But you might be asking, why fossil fuel companies? Okay. And yes, I'm sure you guys all know that fossil fuel companies in general have caused the vast majority of carbon emissions, which is reason alone to, you know, divest from them, because that is just not good at all. And it's not in line with Marquette's Jesuit values, but also because they knew about climate change 40 years ago, and instead of doing what they could to stop it and prevent it, they actually misled the public and funneled billions of dollars into misinformation campaigns, which is absolutely reprehensible. They also spend billions of dollars on climate lobbying to make sure that no legislation gets passed around climate change. All of their, okay, so these are like 8 of the most, or like the biggest oil companies in the world, and as of last year, all 8 of them had climate plans that came nowhere close to what we need, according to the Paris Agreement guidelines. They also reject a ton of shareholder resolutions. They make sure that these shareholder resolutions on climate change don't even get to a vote, and the ones that do get to a vote, literally not a single one between these 3 companies, and you know, between the years 1990 and 2015 have passed. They've also misled the public into believing plastic would be recycled. Cancer Alley, if you don't know what that is, give it a quick Google after this. There's a huge area of Louisiana that consists of mostly Black people that has a ton of oil refineries, and it causes super high rates of cancer. the worst part about this is that they actually knew about how bad their air pollution was, and like, you know, climate change, instead of educating the public about how bad air pollution was, especially for pregnant mothers, they lied about it in order to protect their profits. So, I mean, each of these news stories is reason alone to divest from fossil fuels and to completely just like take away their social license to operate. But I hope that the message that everybody's getting from this is that if you aren't furious at the fossil fuel industry for all the damage they've done, you simply aren't paying enough attention. Okay. And this is what I want to emphasize the most. These companies have done so much damage, and I might be sounding like radical right now for saying all this, but this is the truth. None of like these companies, and like the large ones in particular, line up with our Jesuit values at all. So that's kind of what the divestment movement is about. There's also a huge financial case to divest. I mean, these companies are just terrible, like financial investments too. If you look at the overall market in the last 10 years since the global fossil fuel divestment movement started in 2012, the market, the S&P 500, has increased in value by 207%, while the oil and gas sector has decreased by 37%. It has been the worst performing sector in the S&P 500 for like literally a decade now, and it's only going to go downhill from here. I mean, even the S&P 500, they downgraded a bunch of oil firms because they noted significant challenges and uncertainties engendered by the energy transition, including market declines due to the growth of renewables. Okay, and just so you guys know, renewables are now the cheapest form of electricity when you're accounting for subsidies, or sorry, you're not even accounting for subsidies, and you're accounting for operation costs over like the entire lifetime of plants. If you look at the graph, you can see that in the last 10 years, the price of solar voltaic energy has decreased 89%, which is insane. It blows coal out of the water. It's competing with gas. Same thing with onshore wind. So we can see that since renewables are like super competitive now too, oil and gas is downhill. And anybody who's still invested in these, I mean, if you're invested in these companies, then you better pull out right now because you're going to keep losing money. But there's also a legal case to divest too. So fiduciary responsibility, and this is a term that essentially means that Marquette has an obligation to uphold its standards in whatever it's invested in. And this is dictated by the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, the UPMIFA. It was adopted by Wisconsin in 2009. And so this law was actually pointed to by a bunch of other, actually no, not a bunch, 3 other colleges so far, including Boston College in December, and then Harvard actually just did the same thing. A few weeks ago, they sent a letter, or they sent a formal complaint to the Massachusetts Attorney General, basically saying that their university's investments in fossil fuels is literally against this law, which has been adopted by 49 states. I think Pennsylvania is the only one that hasn't adopted it, but here's what the law states actually. An institution in managing and investing an institutional fund shall consider the charitable purposes of the institution and shall manage and invest the fund in good faith with the care an ordinarily prudent person in a like position would exercise under similar circumstances. Okay, and if you don't know what the word prudent means, here's a definition. Acting or showing care and thought for the future. So again, the fossil fuel divestment movement, and especially the one that campaign, is arguing that Marquette isn't really showing thought for the future by investing in fossil fuel companies. I mean, reminder, in our mission statement, it ends with all of this we pursue for the greater glory of God and the common benefit of the human community. So there is an argument that any investments in these companies is literally against Wisconsin state law. But we're not going to talk about that right now. Instead, let's just focus on divestment and how it actually works. So for an example, divestment helps end South African apartheid in the 80s and 90s. Here's like a picture from a protest back in the day. There were campaigns like this one that was focused on South African apartheid, and they essentially encouraged their colleges to divest from any company that had business in South Africa and was benefiting from apartheid. And it worked. It actually put pressure on the South African government to end apartheid, which is really awesome. So we know that historically it works, but also with regard to like fossil fuel companies, it works too. It drives down share prices of companies. It reduces capital inflows. and it boosts public acceptance of climate solutions. And all the sources for these studies are at the bottom, so you can check them out. But we know that it works. And the thing is, I was telling my mom about this a few weeks ago, and I was like, oh, like divestment, you know, I was telling her about like the work that Fossil Free Marquette is doing. And she told me, well, is that really going to make a difference though? I mean, Marquette only has an endowment of a few $100 million. If you compare that to the fossil fuel industry, that's like, you know, trillions of dollars in that industry. And what I responded with was, well, okay, $19.76 trillion has already been divested from fossil fuels so far. So yes, the fossil fuel industry is, you know, $1 trillion industry, but this number is literally higher than the GDP of China. So like, it adds up. That's what we're saying. But yeah, so fossil-free institutions around the world, there's a lot of faith-based organizations that are completely fossil-free. They do not invest in fossil fuels, and instead they reinvest in renewable solutions. Same thing with educational institutions as well. That's the second highest on this list. But here's just like a rough idea of like the universities that have already divested from fossil fuels. Okay, there's Ivy League schools like Columbia, Cornell, Brown. There's public schools like the University of Illinois, Michigan, University of California, which, side note, they completely divested just for financial reasons. They don't really care what the Pope says. They don't care about like the Jesuit values, because they're not Jesuit, they're a public school. And they divested before COVID. So after all those stocks went down because nobody was like using oil and gas anymore for like their commutes, they actually saved a ton of money in doing this. So good for them. Syracuse, Rutgers, Maryland, these schools actually just divested a few weeks ago. Other private schools like Dayton, USC, Cambridge, Oxford, and England, and some Jesuit schools as well, like Georgetown, Seattle U, and Creighton, and also the Vatican, okay, which you guys might have heard of. I hope you've heard of it. The Vatican's completely fossil free. They do not invest in fossil fuels. So let's quickly talk about that. So the Pope has encouraged divestment. In 2020, there were 2 separate occasions in which he said this, and you can read these quotes, but he encouraged Catholics to avoid investing in companies that harm human or social ecology, for example, through abortion or the arms trade, or environmental ecology, such as fossil fuels. And then he also had a TED Talk in October where he basically said the same thing. But the Pope is all for this. So the fact that a bunch of Jesuit schools, including Marquette, aren't really listening to this is a little bit concerning. But I mean, we know we can change it, so that's why we're here. So fossil-free Marquette's ongoing work. Obviously, we want Marquette to be on the forefront of climate action. We want Marquette to uphold its Jesuit values. And we're doing that by an Earth Day referendum on April 22nd, and we want students to get their voices heard. So essentially how this works is that we went through MUSG, Marquette Student Government Senate, and we wrote this resolution, which actually got like support from Black Student Council, SEEK, Financial Management Association, Native American Student Association, and Marquette College Democrats and College Republicans, in addition to a bunch of other organizations too. So this has, fossil fuel divestment has support from basically every group on campus that is concerned with social justice and like political advocacy. So yeah, the referendum, let me explain this a little bit more. It's going to be on April 22nd, which is Earth Day. It's next Thursday. Every single student will be able to vote on whether or not they support fossil fuel divestment. And the purpose of this is, oh yeah, by the way, the link will be emailed out on the morning of the 22nd. So this will help inform the MUSG. They will vote on another resolution that's like this, where it essentially recommends that the university takes action based on what the students say. So we want students to vote yes to fossil fuel divestment on Earth Day. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail in a little bit. But here's just an example of why we know that this can be done. If Creighton can divest, so can Marquette. They had a really similar campaign. They had a fossil fuel divestment movement. And in 2019, they had a student referendum, just like the one that we are doing on Thursday, next Thursday. And right after it happened, 85% of the students voted yes, and the university replied to them and said, sorry, no, we're not divesting from fossil fuels right now. Too bad. just a few months later, the administration actually thought, oh, maybe those students had a point. And they divested partially. And I think like 10% of their portfolio was invested in fossil fuels, which, equates to millions of dollars. So this is a pretty big deal. And finally, 413 days after the original referendum, Creighton actually fully divested because they realized, you know what, we're tired of losing money. We're tired of disobeying Pope Francis. We're going to listen to the students because their voices matter. So we're hoping that if Creighton can divest, so can Marquette. So we're following their approach. With that being said, we're moving on to the last part, action items, okay? And this is all about climate action at Marquette, no matter who you are, if you're faculty, staff, if you're a student, there's tons of ways to get involved and help out. So an important thing I just want to say really quick is that there's a difference between individual change and systemic change, okay? And there's things that you can do as an individual. There's things that you can push for as like a whole campus or a whole country, but we need both, and that's the simple truth. The other thing too is individual action can help lead to systemic change and vice versa. So like, for example, recycling, okay? It may seem like, sure, you just recycling like a can of beer isn't really gonna do a whole lot, but at the same time, if you recycle that can, it'll help make a new recycled aluminum can that has 95% less carbon emissions involved in the production of that can, as opposed to making a can from new aluminum. So stuff like that reduces the demands of energy, and it makes a difference. But we also just need to understand that we can't let individual action dominate the conversation, okay? We need to have systemic change if we want to confront climate change with the urgency that it demands. So there's two subjects that kind of fall into this idea, nudges and victim blaming. So the first one, there was this study that was published in 2019 that essentially said if people are presented with like an easy choice to like help reduce their carbon footprint, then they're not going to be as fully supportive of like a wide scale change, like a carbon tax or like a cap and trade system, stuff that's like a broader form of climate action. So we can't let individual actions downplay like the reality that we need systemic change too. And another point too is the victim blaming. This is something that tobacco did back in the day when they were under fire for causing like cancer in people. They started to blame people that were addicted to cigarettes for like their own demise from cancer, which is ridiculous. And the fossil fuel industry is doing the same thing. They are trying to blame like people for being addicted to fossil fuels and using cars and stuff, which, this is the world that they helped create, and they're trying to perpetuate that by like stopping, like, for example, like electric vehicles from taking hold in America. So we can't let like, the broader population of Americans be blamed for the horrible stuff that like the industry at large has done. But after, we just talked about individual change versus systemic change. So let's talk about what that looks like at Marquette. So fossil fuel divestment, I mentioned this earlier, things that you can do to help us right now. Mark your calendar on April 22nd, do it right now. And if you teach a class or you lead a club meeting or you're even in class and you want to talk about this, set aside time to allow students to vote and make sure that students vote yes, because this is an issue that, again, we received bipartisan support. This is an issue that there's literally no argument against, okay? Spread the word too. Share our posts on social media at Fossil Free Marquette on Instagram. Give us a follow and share our posts. Also speak to your classes, colleagues about divestment. Take 5 minutes during club meetings to talk about it and spread the word, because we just need students to vote yes. We also have a petition online if you want to sign that. Go to linktree/fossilfreemu. And then also bring it up in other contexts too. If you're like on faculty, bring this up in academic senate, MU Wire, you can write for them. Bring it up in class essays or department meetings, like anything you want. We need to get creative. Other sustainability movements on campus that we don't really have right now, but we can maybe like consider in the future and work towards. So like carbon neutrality. And I know Chelsea talked about this a little bit too, but essentially, if we want Marquette to only source their energy from renewables, we could do that. And it'll take student action and faculty action, but it's possible. Other campuses have done that. Environmental justice curricula, it'd be pretty cool if like students could take a class that's just focused on environmental justice and the intersections of race and like class and the environment. There's a lot of intersections there that tie into the Jesuit tradition. Also, think outside the box. I mean, there's a ton of other ways to be involved in sustainability that I didn't mention, but you can bring your own talents, your own background to the table, and everybody's welcome in the environmentalism community. We need to get creative about the ways that we approach climate change. So yeah, if you want to get involved, here's the information for Seek. Scan our QR code to join our GroupMe. Otherwise, follow us on Instagram, get on our email list, send us an email. If you want to get involved with Fossil Free Marquette, you think that you could contribute or you have ideas that you could share, send us an email or DM us on Instagram. There's also a countrywide, or I'm sorry, like global Catholic climate movement. This is a really cool organization, and they specifically just encourage Catholics to be more climate conscious. It's a really cool organization. This is their website, so check them out. But yeah, some other actions too. Vote for the planet. Only vote for signees of the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge. So essentially just voting for people who don't take money from fossil fuels. This doesn't necessarily mean don't vote for Republicans, because Republicans actually used to be like really on board with climate action in the 90s before they started to get tons of funding from fossil fuels. But hopefully this changes. I mean, if everybody like stops voting for people who take money from fossil fuels, including Democrats, we could change the political landscape. Try to also understand processes too. So like, how does recycling work? Where does my food come from? Question these things. How does historical racism multiply the threats of climate change? There's ways to ask yourself questions in order to understand climate change a little bit better, and finding out more creative solutions to fixing it. And then, like I said earlier, use your own talents, skills, background to be more sustainable. Ask yourself, how can you promote environmental justice in your workplace? Or how can you educate your social circles about sustainability? So there's a lot of ways to take action, get involved on campus or off campus. But the take-home message that I want everybody to walk away from this talk with is, 1, we are well beyond debating climate change. Let's talk climate action, okay? 2, environmental justice isn't new to Catholicism. The entire church has been preaching about the importance of ecological conservation for decades and centuries, and it's not new. Climate action is also not radical. Inaction is. We need to take action right now because we can't keep going with the status quo. We need both systemic change and individual change. And lastly, everyone can help in their own way. So these are the messages that I want everybody to walk away from this talk with. So yeah, that's it. That's all I got. Here's my contact information. Here's a reminder about the Earth Day referendum that we want students to vote yes to. Here's information for Seek. And then last but not least, here's a little quote that I like. But yeah, I know there's a lot of information. I want to leave. We have 9 minutes left for questions. I'm willing to stay a little longer too, but if you have any questions, throw them in the chat or unmute yourself or raise your hand, whatever works.
I have a question about like with the construction happening on campus too, and like the impact of that, because like I mean it's gonna be going through like the rest of the year, I think, into the 2022, and what that'll lead to.
Yeah, honestly, I don't really know a whole lot about that. I think Chelsea can speak to that more than I. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, could you be a little bit more specific about your concern about the impacts, or just? I
guess like the impact of like the use of the equipment, like the emissions with that, and the long run of that impact.
Yeah, so I think our team my position is housed under facilities, and I think my team is the team here is really conscientious of, you know, we can't really do anything about the emissions piece of it necessarily, but we are really conscientious of where the demo materials are going and how we make it as less of like a actual like physical impact to students on campus, and that's always like a big communication piece. You know, in the future, I'd love to like think a little bit more. You know, I wasn't involved in this process as much as I'd like to be because of the timing I came onto this position. But in the future, there's always, you know, I am really, one of my like top priorities is working with our project management team to understand exactly like how we can have less of an environmental impact, not necessarily physical impact, when we're doing like renovation or construction projects. That's a great question though.
Thank you.
As a follow-up to that, I know that you were brought on after they pretty much planned it all out, but you are, like, as you said, going over a lot of like the energy consumption on campus. Were you at all involved like after that, like with the energy that's going to be in the new building, like, and then more specifically, like, is the new building going to be any level of LEED certified?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. I think that's one of the pieces, once I kind of started learning a little bit more about the university's sustainability initiatives already, is that our project management team does an incredible job of thinking about whether it's a renovation or just some like random project of ways that they can bundle up in like the project budget energy conservation measures. And with this project, it was no different. And one thing I do want to say is that just because a building is LEED certified doesn't necessarily mean that it operates in a way that is efficient, because that certification can mean a lot of different things. And there's all these different sections. So also LEED certification is expensive. So it's not cheap. But one thing that the university does do and our project team does do is use LEED Green Living or Living Building Challenge, the WELL standards as a framework for designing projects. So like a lot of projects on campus that aren't LEED certified are still, or any kind of building certification, they may still meet those standards. We just didn't pay for the certification. So this building definitely meets a lot of those checkpoints. Another thing I'll say is that we are, the building is going to have solar panel mounts. We're still trying to figure out how to actually acquire panels and pay for it. A part of this project, there are things I cannot talk about at this time, but we are, and the president of the university is actually really excited about getting more solar on campus. So, and this building will have, is designed to put solar on it either at building time, if we can figure out how to do that when the roof is on, or at a later time. So it is like a #1 priority.
I guess I'll ask another question, but for Joseph, I know you outlined, I believe it was Creighton and like their path to divestment, and they had like a very similar process to what we're going through with the referendum right now. I guess I just like would want to ask, do you see if it does like get approved in like a similar like majority that they had, like any sort of like not immediate action, but like how involved do you think the university would get, and like how soon could it come about?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question because I'm not really familiar with the process of how the university responds to the results of a referendum. But I do know that MUSG will be like really watching closely what happens with that, because I mentioned this in the talk, but there's going to be a separate piece of legislation that they will vote on depending on the results of the referendum. So if there is a majority of students that vote yes, then they will formally issue a recommendation for Marquette to follow what the students are saying. But yeah, it's really not binding. Unfortunately, it's just intended to show how many students align with this perspective, which hopefully is like a big portion.
So, Joe, when you talk to your classmates about this, what are the responses when it it calls on personal responsibility. What questions do people ask you back? What do they want to know about? What are ways in which they're open and or defensive about some of these issues? You've really talked about it from an organizational point of view when people are all in. What are some of the challenges you come up amongst students, in terms of sort of personal responsibility, but also institutional responsibility?
Yeah, is this with like regard to divestment or just like lowering your carbon footprint and stuff like that?
Any of that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think like the response from students, if you like, let's take like eating meat for an example. So like meat is, it has like a way higher carbon footprint than if you have like a vegetarian or vegan diet. Okay. And a lot of people are really like averse to doing that because like meat is such a staple of like American cuisine. So if you like tell people to try to like change their diet or like adopt like different patterns of behavior, like in order to make their carbon footprint lower, it depends on what it is, but generally students are like on board as long as it's not too radical. It really depends on like the person though. I mean, honestly, I feel like there's not really like a universal approach that people can take, but I think one important thing about these conversations is that you need to like understand the person, relate to them, and like link it back to like the values that they hold. Because like, for example, if they're Catholic, then they'll understand that like they do have an individual responsibility to care for the ecological community around them. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Cool. I see Claire has a question too.
Hey, yeah, this is more on the lines of like small contributions, but so my apartment complex doesn't recycle, so it's harder to like make those individual, contributions. But what process like do I go through to try to petition for them to recycle, or like how can I go out of my way to do it in an individual way? I guess I know you recycle obviously, but like if I don't have those dumpsters, like what do I do?
Yeah, Chelsea might know this better than I would, but
yeah, I can jump in. This might be an offline conversation too, Claire, because if you don't live in the city of Milwaukee, then that's a whole other kind of thing. You do? Okay, so I would say let's do offline conversation if you want to follow up with an email, because the time is running out and also it's a much bigger conversation. But I can definitely help you with that.
Sweet, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess one more thing I will say. Oops, sorry, Mary has a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead and say what you were going to say if you want to.
Yeah, I guess the thing I was just going to say is that recycling is great. But at the same time, like if you don't recycle, it's not the end of the world. And like we can't expect everybody to like do everything that they can to like promote sustainability. There's this quote that I love. If I'm remembering this correctly, it's we don't need just a few people doing sustainability and like zero waste perfectly. We just need billions of people doing it imperfectly. So if you can't recycle, that's okay, as long as you just try in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
And piggybacking on that, maybe that goes to the cutting down on meat consumption too. I think people are less averse to becoming completely vegetarian, or less averse to actually cutting down than they are to becoming perhaps completely vegetarian or vegan. But obviously more impact if they do. What I was going to say is, taking the long view, I graduated from Marquette in 1982. There was no sustainability coordinator at that point. There was no environmental studies major. And I'm so glad to see both things there, and that the major has prepared Joseph so well to articulate the views he has today and go off to be a Jesuit volunteer. I did have a question about the kind of the fifth two-word summary that you said, it's fixable. I know my understanding, I don't want to be a doomer, but some scientists have come very close to saying, hey, we're getting very, very close to the point where it's too late. Do either of you know when that point might be? What is the wisdom on that now? and what needs to be done well, all of this needs to be done, but when might that be?
Yeah, okay, so that's a great question. I think that is a really, really interesting conversation. But I think one thing that we hear thrown around a lot is like, oh, we only have 8 years to stop climate change, or like we need to do this by like 2030 and stuff like that. And it's, yes, like if you look at the assessment reports from the IPCC, they have stated that we need to like decrease carbon emissions. You know, we need to decrease our carbon concentration to like 350 parts per million. But I think a lot of that sentiment really gets lost in translation when you try to like almost make it more accessible to a wider audience, because the truth is like, it's not like if we don't reach that by 2030, the world's going to explode, you know, and every incremental action that we can take matters. So I think that, yes, like scientists do say that we're getting like further and further away from reaching that goal, but that doesn't mean we should give up. And I think people should realize that no matter what, like it's still worth fighting for, even if we're going to end up a little bit warmer than what we hoped for.
One thing I'll add to that too, because I think, you know, Joseph, obviously we've talked and worked together, and I personally do not like the term fixable because it's not fixable. The climate is changing, but what is fixable, if you will, we're not going to reverse climate change. We have already reached the point of no return. What is fixable is we cannot make it worse, aggravate it, and we can also find ways to mitigate and adapt. So for me, coming from my perspective, I'm all about climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation. We're not going to fix climate change. So it's just that linguistic term, oh, we're going to, you know, climate change is fixable. What's fixable is us not ending up in, you know, a Mad Max post-apocalyptic world because of droughts and climate migration and stuff, which are all going to happen, but we can fix that being from completely catastrophic if we make the right policy changes, the right individual actions, the right, you know, divestment from fossil fuels, and investment in renewables, all those things. So that's more like my perspective on, you know, the way I see how we can move forward in this, in our world.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you. And Chelsea, you're kind of right about like the phrasing is fixable. Maybe instead we should use there's hope.
I have to go, but I want to be able to like share this link to people. Where will that be?
So I'm going to be uploading the recording later on Campus Ministries YouTube page. So if you go there later on, it'll be found there.
Okay, thank you.
So if anyone doesn't have any more questions, I think we could end it there. So thank you, Joseph and Chelsea, for speaking today. It was a really great presentation. And we do have another event next Wednesday, and the topic's going to be understanding gender expression. So that's going to be same time, noon, on Microsoft Teams. And I included the link in the chat to sign up for any future events that we have. But thank you for everyone for coming, and have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.